The earth is creative. Okay, so in previous videos we've gone over what creativity is and how it functions. We've looked at historical creativity and personal creativity. We've looked at how expertise affects creativity. And we've also looked at one example of the creative process. And now that we have a greater idea of what creativity is, let's look at how it manifests in the world. So there's really three separate ways. The first way that we're going to look at how creativity manifests is through the combination of familiar and unfamiliar ideas. The second way will be through exploring conceptual space. And the third way will be transforming that conceptual space. Now let's start unpacking these ideas. We're going to start off with making combinations between unfamiliar and familiar ideas. And while this might seem a little weird, it should also sound familiar. We've gone over this. This is really abstract connections. There are multiple ways to make combinations between unfamiliar and familiar ideas. One way is through poetic imagery. For instance, if you were to listen to a musician play a solo, and in that solo they came in super quiet and super delicate, you might compare that solo to a dew dropping off of a blade of grass in the morning. Another example would be making a collage in painting or textiles. A collage is where you combine multiple images together to make one greater image. And the last example would be analogies. If I was trying to describe musical concepts to an athletic-minded person, I might use athletic concepts to help cement musical concepts. The next way that creativity might manifest is through exploring conceptual spaces.
Now, just wait a second. There are a lot of big words that you just used there. Can you please go over what exactly that means?
Good question. So the definition of conceptual is the idea of a mental space. In other words, we're really talking about a field of study. So that might be music, art, football, engineering. So when we are talking about exploring conceptual spaces or exploring a field of study, we are really talking about coming up with new ideas within that space or within that field. And the key point to this is that we are trying to play within the bounds of that field or within the bounds of that space. We are playing within the rules. Some spaces or fields might have a richer potential than others. For example, there are more moves to make in chess than there are in checkers. You can be more creative in the game of chess than you can in checkers. Did you also notice that I just used an analogy to describe conceptual spaces? Now I'm going to dive a little bit deeper to help you understand this idea. So we're going to talk about the Western music tradition. This is specifically going over mostly European countries in talking about Gregorian chant, the Renaissance, going over classical, going over romantic periods. We're talking about composers like Mozart, Beethoven, Bach. And throughout the Western musical tradition, composers mostly used harmony to express themselves. Not always, however, a large chunk of the Western musical tradition has been about exploring harmony. And all the composers that I mentioned found new ways to expand harmony, and this allowed them to express themselves in a more nuanced way. The last way that creativity manifests in the world is through transforming a space. And someone can transform a space when they start to realize the limitations of what they're working within. And just a reminder that so far everything that we've talked about is being creative within the boundaries and the rules of the space or the field. And once you realize where those boundaries are, you can start to push them back. This is another reason why some people say that you must know the rules before you break the rules. To make any meaningful change within a field, you must know what rules are important and are To make any meaningful change within a field or space, you must know why the rules are in place before you change or break those rules. This is why expertise is important in being creative. So to give an example, we're going to look at music, specifically the Western musical tradition. And if you remember, we were talking about how Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, and Wagner, and multiple others, they were all playing with harmony and expanding the harmonic language that we know and love today. However, then a gentleman named Arnold Schoenberg came along, and he developed a system that we call the 12-tone system. Now, before going over what the 12-tone system is, we really should touch up again on what exactly tonal harmony is. So harmony is when you play 2 or more notes on top of each other. Usually the max is 3 or 4, and there's also extended harmony, but then we're getting into some complications. So let's just worry about playing 2 to 4 notes at the same time. And one of the main things that you need to know is that within harmony, there is a hierarchy, and within any given musical key, there are specific notes that are more important than others. And this concept is really what drives most of the music that you love and know today. And Schoenberg started to realize that at that time, there wasn't really a way to expand our knowledge in tonal harmony. So he developed a 12-tone system. And what this system does is get rid of that tonal hierarchy. All notes are now equal. And just so you understand how drastically Arnold Schoenberg changed music, you should really go listen to one of his pieces. I would suggest Perrault Lunaire. This is where you compare 2 things, and typically this is used when you are trying to describe something. And when you're listening to this, what you have to realize is that Arnold Schoenberg thought that he came up with the newest and greatest thing in music. And really, at the time he did. For decades, this is the way that art composers mostly express themselves. They used 12-tone harmony. Composers started to use this to explore new ways to express themselves, to explore a new conceptual space. One other thing to keep in mind is that this specific example is a lesson on value. What Arnold Schoenberg did not realize is how much people valued the harmonic language that we know and love. He really tried to change culture, and that was too drastic of a change. What he also didn't realize is that other composers in other genres were exploring music in creative ways that were not in harmony. And because of that, those got more traction. They explored a different conceptual space or a different field. Now, keep in mind, if you think that this is a bad piece of music, that's not really correct. You just don't find the value in the music. You don't find the value of how Schoenberg is expressing himself. And that's not a bad thing. 12-tone music is a completely different way to express yourself musically. What you have to remember is that creativity is very subjective. There's no right or wrong answers, and when usually someone considers something bad, what they really mean is that they don't see the value in it, and that again is okay. And now that you know how creativity functions and manifests in a general sense, I want you to go forth and be creative.